So welcome back. This is week 3, entrepreneurial marketing. And during this week, you're going to hear about developing strategies that make your marketing work, that will help your company to grow, and that will help your firm to get traction in the marketplace, i.e. you are on the way to establishing a healthy, viable new business. There are a couple of issues that we will be discussing this week, but the first segment discusses probably one of the most important elements, which is the development of your marketing strategy. The development of your marketing strategy is one of the core strategic activities that you engage in during the firm creation process. Let's remember that the market, i.e. the customers in that market, will ultimately pay for your company creation. Because they like your product, they will pay for your products, and that money will come into your company as cash flow. So when you think about developing a marketing strategy, one of the core elements that you need to decide upon is the target market segment that you want to address. And the other core element that you want to decide upon is how that target segment should perceive your product vis-a-vis the competitor's product. So let's go back to what we discussed in the introductory segment to this week on entrepreneurial marketing, where we actually gave you a systematic framework. So let me remind you about this framework and then show you what we will be doing in this segment. So the fundamentals are the following. Building on that basis, you can then decide which target segments get the most benefit from your product, and also how those customers in this target segment should perceive your company. Yeah. The second element would be the strategic element to it. It means, how should I be positioned? How should I be? What is my target market? We call this the segmentation decision and the positioning decision. And as I mentioned, these are two core strategic decisions that you engage in during the development of your marketing strategy. Based on these two core strategic decisions, you will be able to decide upon a whole range of other issues that are more operational, that are in the implementation phase of your marketing strategy. And some of you might have heard of the well-known marketing mix. Exactly those elements would be the operational ones, the implementation issues. So it's the marketing mix and the implementation that follows. And what we will be discussing are the 7 Ps, which are an extension of the 4 Ps with a special consideration about the service industry, and a couple of other implementation issues like guerrilla marketing, etc. But one thing is core. You need to understand the difference between the strategic elements and more of the implementation elements. This is something that many entrepreneurs do unfortunately not get right, and then have to adjust and readjust their marketing implementation. So when we think about marketing, really keep this in mind, that there's a strategic level to it and there's a more implementation, operational level to it. So the first element that you need to understand is the firm's distinctive competence. Why is this important? Because the firm's distinctive competence allows you to establish advantage vis-a-vis the competition. There must be something that you're really, really good at in your company. You know? Think about your own competences. If you, as a person, if you are applying for a job out there, you need to be special. You need to have some competences that other people who apply for this job actually do not have, so that you get that job. And the same logic applies in firm creation as well. You need to find out what your company is really good at, produce products that embody that great skill, capability, and then you have something to provide to the market where the customer say, wow, that is a great product, that's a great offering, I choose yours vis-a-vis the competition's offering. Yeah? So in that sense, the firm's core, this competitive advantage issue that it relates to, is something that you need to address and need to understand early on in your ventures creation. So when we think about distinctive competence, it can be multiple things. In a high-tech venture, it's typically the technology. The technology that is innovative, that is novel, that has aspects to it that renders services that other technologies cannot render. But it can also be excellent design, high quality, customer service. Typically, when we look at the successful startups, it's a mix of all these elements, and even more elements. Why is this the case? This is because other firms, your competitors, will have a hard time copying you, imitating what you're doing if your competitive advantage relies on so many ingredients. And it's just harder to observe what you're doing, and it's just harder to imitate. So once you have a bundle of competences that you build on, you actually have quite a leg forward towards relative to the competition. And this understanding of your distinctive competences and your competitive advantage will actually form the basis for all subsequent marketing decisions. The core ones, the strategic ones, and the more operational ones, the implementation issues that we discussed before. The segmentation decision answers the question, which is my target market, while the positioning decision answers the question, why will someone in the target market buy my product or service instead of the competitions? So you really see how those segmentation and positioning decisions are two sides of the same coin. That's why they should be determined jointly. Let's look at them in more detail to make you understand what they entail. So let's start with segmentation. Entrepreneurs typically only serve one segment. This is because they have limited resources, limited attention. Some entrepreneurs might decide to say, I enter multiple segments at once, but this can only be done if there's some strong synergy between the segments. But typically, you focus on one segment, and this segment deserves your full attention. Because there are customer requests from this segment, you want to enter the segment successfully, create happy customers that are talking about your product in a favorable way. So you create word of mouth. So the central question in segmentation is, who are my customers? And building on that question, you have a couple of additional questions that you need to check and answer in order to understand whether that segment that you have chosen is actually a good one. Okay. So the first question is hinting to this notion that positioning and segmentation are two closely related decisions that should be jointly developed, because it asks you, is the perceived benefit that my positioning targets matching the benefits desired by this customer segment? So there needs to be an alignment. Another key question is how quickly can I reach this segment? What's the size and purchasing power of this segment? And if you look across time, are there possible changes in this segment that may affect the purchasing power and other attributes of this segment, i.e. could make it more or less attractive to you? And finally, you may also want to think about the competitors' activities in this segment. So here's a checklist for successful segmentation. A successful segmentation should be one where there's homogeneity of needs and wants within the segment, and there's heterogeneity of needs and wants between segments. And this picture is actually quite telling in that sense, because you see three people here, all wear a red sweater, all have white glasses on, they have the same beard, the same hairstyle, and even the same smile. They might be triplets, but I think they photoshopped the same person and tripled him. So in that sense, what is interesting is that if you are, from a company's perspective, looking at this segment here, these types of people, you will say, okay, I exactly know what they need, what they want. It's homogeneous, it's the same, and that provides you with some ability to send a marketing message that is very targeted, because you know what they need. If these would be now different types of people, one wearing a blue sweater, another one wearing a green sweater, you would have a much harder time in saying, okay, do I actually fulfill the needs of these people very well? And they might actually come back to you and say, the one guy says to you, well, I need a product that is different in terms of shape and design. The other one needs another type of product, so that will kill you in terms of complexity. So a good segment should thus have small differences within the segment and large differences to other segments. You should also be able to determine the size of the segment. If you cannot determine the size of the segment, it's typically an indication that you did not segment well enough. And ultimately, the segment should be large enough so that you can be profitable as a company. So these elements provide you with a checklist, but I think fundamentally try to think of the benefits that you will establish by saying, this is my target market. I know who these people are. I know which type of marketing messages appeal to them. Because once you can say this, these people will come back and say, wow, I was addressed with my needs through your marketing messages. Let me get your product. An interesting example of segmentation is the mobile phone market. Many factors play into the segmentation decision in this market. For instance, psychographic lifestyle considerations, consumer behavior, as the more sophisticated ways of segmenting a market, but also geographic and demographic characteristics such as age, gender, family size, etc. So just look at these different pictures that people could use to market different phones. This already tells you which type of market segments these phones are attending to address. And look to the left side. There's, for instance, the BlackBerry, which used to be a business phone for business people. The target segment was specifically designed that way. Nowadays, BlackBerry tries to relaunch itself as a money-sending device. So, that could be a strategy that BlackBerry could adopt. I think ultimately you need to choose criteria that will allow you to have an interesting understanding, a very deep understanding of your target market. The decision that has to be taken in parallel to the segmentation decision is the positioning decision. The positioning is so important as it portrays how the customers should perceive your product, your company vis-a-vis the competition. And especially when you think about new firms, these are unknown entities in new and innovative markets oftentimes. So that customers should actually understand the unique attributes of that company. And that relates back to what we have been already discussing with respect to the competitive advantage question and the core competence question at the beginning of this segment. So the central question is, what are the unique differentiating characteristics of my product or service as perceived by members of the target segment? So there are a couple of further questions that you will need to understand in order to provide and develop a compelling positioning. The first question here is a very relevant one. It says, why should my product service be bought instead of the competitors? We mentioned this issue briefly when you remember that in the previous module where we talked about putting yourself in the customer's shoes. This is exactly what it means here. Try to understand why my customer should choose my product and not the competitor's product. This relates then to the second question, which differentiating characters should my target segment perceive? And this might sound like a trivial question, but with most innovations, it's not a trivial question. This is because you have lots of features in a product, and you need to understand which features should actually put to the forefront when you communicate with the customer so that he can perceive those features. And it's not a trivial question because it actually could turn out to lead to insights like the one that you say, okay, this is not a segment that actually values my product. So you go back to the drawing board and say, okay, maybe this target segment is not fitting my positioning or the type of benefits that I want to render to the segment. So here's an example about positioning in the auto market. In the auto market, oftentimes customers perceive cars as either being sporty or more conservative, and they perceive cars as being either classy and distinctive or practical and affordable. So if you have that positioning cross, you can then start to put all kinds of brands of car companies in there and try to understand how they are perceived by customers. So for instance, if we are in the sporty, classy, distinctive quadrant up here, you have companies like BMW, Audi, Porsche, and for instance, Tesla. While when we are in the quadrant that is more conservative and practical, affordable, this one down here, we would have companies like Plymouth, Dodge, and Ford. Okay, and then again, you have the other quadrants, but I don't walk you through those ones. Let's just remember that this is how the customers perceive the auto market. Okay, so it's really standing in the customer's shoes. For you as an entrepreneur, this is actually quite an interesting type of strategic decision-making process here, because it allows you to understand a couple of issues that are core to your marketing. First, it allows you to understand where are the blank spots, where are no competition. For instance, here, also here. Well, the question then is, well, is this target segment that would be reflecting this type of positioning still be an attractive one? Yeah? It also allows you to understand, well, if you are positioned that way as a new company, who are my direct competitors? Here it would be Tesla, Audi, Porsche, but maybe also Pontiac. Yeah? And in the customer's mind, these companies would be closely together. So in that sense, these would be the ones you want to differentiate yourself most from. But this also allows you to actually say, okay, I do an analysis where we do not use the classical dimensions of how the car market is segmented, here sporty versus conservative and classy versus distinctive, but I actually adopt a new type of dimension and try to understand how the segmentation and the positioning would look like with this new type of dimension. So think about Tesla. They are a company that produces energy efficient cars. They could actually say, okay, the car market is moving into another direction. It's no longer that these two classical dimensions are used in order to understand customer choices. There's a new dimension coming in. It's energy efficiency. So there's high and low on energy efficiency on one axis. You could say, okay, instead of conservative and sporty, you could say low and high energy efficiency. And Tesla would come out ahead, and then you could say, where would all the other companies now be relative to Tesla? And this would provide you with a novel insight into the market. What's the interesting thing then for entrepreneurs is that by introducing new technologies, by providing customers with unique new benefits, you will have and could have the chance to redefine the markets in a way that Tesla is doing it right now and several other companies are trying it to do now. So your positioning, in other words, has to be based on some unique characteristics, and these unique characteristics should be clearly visible, relevant to that segment, and easy to remember. So the focus should be on a couple of important characteristics, few important characteristics. Don't spread yourself too broadly here with lots of characteristics, because the customer will have a difficult time understanding what your product is and how it relates to the competition. What you also need to bear in mind is that customers don't buy features, they buy benefits. So high quality technical features are not enough. Regardless of the real benefit, it's only the benefit that customers perceive that matters most for the buying decision, for the purchasing decision. But ultimately, it's the real benefit that then they will experience when using your product that will tell them, well, shall I be happy about this purchase? Shall I be disappointed? Shall I recommend this product to other people? In other words, will they engage in positive word of mouth or negative word of mouth regarding your product? So let me give you some intuition of what it means when I say customers buy benefits. You all know or many of you know the Kindle reader from Amazon. This is a technical device which you could describe in technical details. It has a certain size, it has a certain weight, it has a certain resolution on the screen, etc. Is the customer caring about these features? He does so, but only to the extent that they can render a benefit to him. So let's look at this advertising that Amazon actually has put out. They say it's perfect for reading. It reads like a real paper, no glare even in bright sunlight. They say it's lighter than a paperback. They say it has a 1-month life battery. They say it has a sharp, clear text. It's easy on the eyes, and you can read in any position. That's basically your perspective as a reader that Amazon is adopting. And they are describing the technical features of the product in a way that the customer will understand what type of benefits these technical features will render to them. And they select a few of these characteristics so that you will ultimately get an understanding, well, this is really perfect for reading. This said, there may also be segments out there that actually value a technical description above anything else. And understanding your target segment means also to understand, well, do they prefer the customer benefit explanation type that I just explained with the Amazon example? Or would they prefer a more technical description, where they would say, well, everything else is blah, blah, blah. We want the hard fact. So as an example, consider Lenovo's online notebook store. This is definitely a store that is addressing the more technologically savvy consumer buyer of notebooks, because it walks you through a couple of questions. These are mostly technical questions, so that you can understand which type of PC you need. So you need to select between the primary use of your computer, what type of computer you are looking for, what features are important for you, and what price you are willing to spend. And then Lenovo provides you with some examples of computers that fit your needs. But this is a fairly different way of asking and pointing out the features compared to the more benefit-driven explanations that we have just seen with the Amazon Kindle example. So coming to the end of this segment on developing your marketing strategy, there are a couple of key issues that I want you to remember. First, we have seen that there are fundamental decisions regarding the competences that you have in a company that will form the basis for making all subsequent decisions. These core strategic marketing decisions that build on this understanding of what your distinctive competence is are the decisions regarding your segmentation and are the decisions regarding your positioning of your company. And these decisions are core to everything else you will be doing in marketing, especially the implementation of your marketing plan, which then entails distribution decisions, advertising decisions. Because ultimately, if you do not have a clear idea who your target customers are, if you do not have a clear about how your target customers should perceive your company, you will have an incredibly hard time understanding, which type of distribution, which type of advertising you should engage in. So in that sense, keep in mind that there are core strategic decisions that you need to engage in, and then only you can come to the implementation part of your marketing plan. In this sense, see you next time.